The Republican Party has a problem, and that problem is transphobia. And not morally, I think it's morally wrong, of course, but that isn't why the Republican Party has a problem. It has a self-interested problem, is that its transphobia and concentration on the culture war is kind of scaring off a lot of the more semi-moderate pro-business crowd off. And I say semi-moderate as in Mitt Romney moderate, so not really moderate. The mainstream Republican, like, I don't know, 2012, so, 10 years ago, but is now considered moderate because of how crazy the Republican Party has gotten. Here's one example of it, how Peter Thiel, one of the largest mega donors for the Republican Party, is pulling back. He's not giving a dime in the 2024 cycle because he's fed up with how the Republican Party is hardcore concentrating on the culture war issues and not concentrating on economics, making it so the thing that they actually pull better with a lot of people with, even though I disagree that Republicans are better with the economy. George Bush, Obama had to clean up the mess. I don't want to get too much into it. He's pulling back because of the culture war issues, because of the transphobia. Let's read a little bit of the article and then let's get into the data about how not only is this a bad fundraising strategy for the Republican Party, but it's also a bad electoral strategy, and it only works with getting people on viewing your podcasts, and only works in firing up your base, not moderates, not independents, and certainly not getting those from across the aisle to come over to your movement. Exclusive: Peter Thiel, Republican megadonor, won't fund candidates in 2024, sources say. San Francisco, April 26, Reuters. Tech billionaire and Republican megadonor Peter Thiel, an early backer of former President Donald Trump, who later broke with him, has told associates he's not planning to donate to any political candidates in 2024, according to two people close to the businessman. Thiel is unhappy with the Republican Party's focus on hot-button cultural U.S. issues, said one of the sources, a business associate, citing abortion and restrictions on which bathrooms transgender students can use in schools as an example. So, number one, abortion. Abortion is a losing issue for Republicans. Them overturning Roe v. Wade was one of the reasons why Democrats had a record-breaking performance when it comes to having the best performance for an incumbent party, and I think like 30 years since somebody in the incumbent party had a good midterm like that in their first midterm in office. Doing pretty well, much better than anyone expected, and it was largely motivated not only based upon something that got the base very energized was the issue of democracy and ballot access, but also protecting a woman's right to choose in the fallout of Roe versus Wade getting overturned. And here's the second part of this. It is transgender students being denied which bathrooms they can choose in school. Now, for the average Matt Walsh commenter, Matt Walsh viewer, Steven Crowder viewer, maybe, Michael Knowles viewer, this might be something that energizes them. This might be something that energizes 60 to maybe even 65% of the Republican base. And maybe even 80 to 90% of the Republican base agree with it. But it's not something that the majority of Americans really care that much about. It's not something Democrats certainly care about, but it's also something that moderates and independents don't really care about, even if it's something they might even slightly agree with Republicans on.
Burns
and considering how much legislation is being filed all across the country right now, so much legislation in state capitals and federally to restrict transgender people's access to bathrooms, to trying to stop their self-identification, to trying to stop gender-affirming care, to just all across the board, a ton of different legislation all across the country being proposed when they could be concentrating on child tax credits. They could be concentrating on any other number of issues that could energize their base or could motivate moderates and independents to vote for them instead of Joe Biden and the Democrats in 2024. But instead, they're too busy trying to please a small radical portion of their party, a small portion of the overall country, because it gets them viewers on the podcast and it makes sure they win the Republican primaries. Let's read a little bit more of this. Sorry, my phone is blowing up. Air raid siren. God, Jesus Christ. A lot of air raid sirens. Thiel's plans for the Republican Party in general election has not been previously reported. Online news site Puck previously reported Thiel was most likely either to support Trump or sit out of the primary. Thiel declined a Reuters request for an interview. When Thiel spoke at the 2016 Republican National Convention, he had more hope that the party would concentrate on economic issues, his business associate said. I am proud to be gay, Thiel said on stage, but most of all, I am proud to be an American. I don't pretend to agree with every plank in our party's platform, but fake culture wars only distract us from our economic decline, and nobody in this race is being honest about it except Donald Trump. But now Donald Trump is campaigning pretty hard on restricting abortion access, which I think is going to undermine him in a race with Joe Biden, as he's going to point to the overturning of Roe v. Wade, Joe Biden in any general election campaign against Donald Trump, and the fact that Donald Trump's a large portion of his base is the evangelicals who are pushing him super hard to be aggressive on abortion, when reportedly Donald Trump personally doesn't even care that much about abortion, considering his sexual habits. That's not that surprising. 4 political sources also told Reuters that Thiel is taking a step back from U.S. politics. Thiel, who diverged from his Silicon Valley peers with his embrace of conservative causes, identifies as a supporter of libertarianism, a political philosophy that stresses the importance of individual freedoms. Now, maybe he could move over to the Libertarian Party if you really wanted to, but the Libertarian Party is in a nosedive right now as it's being led into the ground by the Mises Caucus, with membership down, with fundraising down, and it's not really an actual alternative to the Republican Party since, third parties don't have a shot. Now, this goes into the rest of this about other donors that are having hesitation about donating to the Republican Party because of who they're concentrating on and because of how badly they performed in 2022, and they don't see them making the necessary reforms to perform that much better in 2024. But I want to look at some data besides the fundraising, because the fundraising aspect is already not looking fantastic for the Republicans. Now they're concentrating on the cultural war issues, but it's also, again, it's serving a small bigoted base. Generally, Democrats, Republicans, some Republicans, moderates, independents, they don't give a fuck. And the data seems to bear that out. I want to look at some data from Data for Progress about how little Americans care about the issues that they are pushing, or even just straight up disagree with them on. Let's look at some of this data. Even Republicans think the amount of anti-LGBTQ plus legislation is excessive political theater. There are currently 429 bills passing through state legislators aimed at limiting the rights of transgender and gay people in the United States. Which statement comes closer to your own view, even if neither is exactly right? This is too much legislation? Politicians are playing political theater and using these bills as a wedge issue? I don't know. Or this is the right amount of legislation. Politicians are dealing with a real danger that needs to be addressed. Now, if you look at that, all likely voters, 64% of all likely voters believes this is too much legislation and it's political theater, with only 25%, which again, that's the Matt Walsh viewers, those are the Michael Knowles viewers, that's that base, that's the hardcore radical base. They disagree. They think this is the right amount of legislation. They're dealing with a real issue. But let's break this down, because the data, when you get into specifics, is actually shocking. Of course, the majority of Democrats, 72%, believe it's too much legislation. But also, the majority of independents and third party members believe it's too much legislation. But here's the real kicker. The majority of Republicans believe this is too much legislation, and it isn't even close. 55 to 33%. This is some crazy data, but let's keep going. We got more data on this as well. Americans believe that transness is natural and normal and not a woke invention. Let's break down this data. Of course, we got 2 options again. Transgender identities are a natural phenomenon that has occurred throughout history. It's normal for free societies to have individuals who identify outside of the norm. Or transgender identities are a new cultural phenomenon created by modern woke culture. These identities have been invented in order to harm our children and our future. 57% agree that transgender identities are a natural phenomenon, with only 33% of all likely voters disagreeing with that. You break it down, it's 78 to 14 for Democrats, 58 for independents and third parties, 29 against, 34. This is now when you get into Republicans disagreeing with the majority of Americans. 34% of Americans, 34% of Republicans believing that it's a natural phenomenon, while 55% disagreeing, which honestly, that number is still much higher than I expected. And if 35% of Republicans believe that it's a natural phenomenon, it's hard to imagine that 55% of the Republican Party, which is smaller than even I would have thought, is enough to motivate independents, is enough to motivate everyone else to jump on the Republican ship. That's the small base that they are playing to. Again, they can win a primary, but they can't win a general. Doug Mastriano in Pennsylvania was a fantastic example of that. Let's look at some more of this data. Americans don't think trans people are a threat to children and families. In your opinion, does the increased visibility of transgender people in America represent a threat to the following people? No versus yes. All likely voters. Heterosexual families, 61% say no, 27% say yes. Children, this is scary because this is a little bit closer, a lot closer than I feel comfortable with, but still, a plurality disagree. 49% say no, 40% say yes. That's for all likely voters. Then there's likely voters that know a trans or non-binary person. The data is much better for that. And likely voters that don't know a trans or non-binary person could see the plurality of those who believe they're a threat to children become the, not the majority, but the plurality, with 45% saying yes, 41% saying no. Let's go. I'm sorry there's so much data we're going through here, but I really want to build the case for, again, transphobia not being a winning issue for Republicans. Next slide. Democrats and people who have seen drag in person are against drag bans. This is not that big of a point. For my wider point, I just wanted to bring this up. You can pause now if you really want to look at this data. And moving on, finally, Democrats and people who have, wait, this is the same thing. Okay. No, this is finally, was posted by Aaron Reed, who is based because they follow me on Twitter. Therefore, they are awesome. That's how the world works. They're posting some data from Fox News because I know some people are going to look at all of that data for progress information. They're going to be like, bullshit, Dylan. That's data for progress. They're progressive. Show me some other pollsters. Broaden your evidence a little bit. Okay, let's broaden the evidence. New Fox News poll shows that a huge majority of people view families with transgender children being targets of political attacks as a major problem. Only 15% of people say it's not a problem. This is a Fox News poll. Here's the question and how it was asked and how it was phrased. And in general, how much of a problem is each of the following? A major problem, a minor problem, or not a problem? 57% say that it is a major problem that families with transgender children are being targeted of political attacks. 26% say it's a minor problem, meaning that actually Aaron didn't conclude this in the original tweet. If you would have put those two data sets together, that's what, over 80% of Americans who believe who believe to some capacity it's a problem, with only 15% believing it isn't. Americans can see the political gamesmanship that is being pushed by people like Matt Walsh, and they're sick of it. They the issues that motivate Americans right now are the tabletop issues. We're talking about child tax credits. We're talking about stimulus bills. We're talking about infrastructure investments. We're talking about unionization. These are the issues that Americans are concerned with right now, as the American economy still looks a little shaky after COVID, and some people are talking about maybe going into a recession. We're seeing CNN articles releasing about recession, or in the possibility of recession, as Donald Trump handed over a shaky economy to the Biden administration. Those are the issues that Americans care about right now. They don't give a fuck about the bathroom shit, right? And look, I want to make sure that trans people feel comfortable when going into bathrooms. But what I'm telling you right, and that might be an important issue to me, but it certainly should not be as politicized as it is. And certainly is not going to motivate Americans to march to the polls when come 2024. It's not going to be the deciding issue. Trans kids are not going to be where the Republican Party lives or dies and succeeds on. If they concentrate on this and ignore the other issues that motivate the actual majority of Americans, the Republican Party is headed towards disaster in 2024, not only financially, but also politically.